All right, hello and welcome. Thank you for carving out some time to be with us today. I know everyone has busy schedules. We're happy to have you join us. This is our 6th installment of our ongoing webinar series on tariffs and trade policy. Quick housekeeping before we get started. Q&A box is going to remain open throughout the session, and we will reserve a few minutes at the end to answer questions live. Again, this is time permitting. We do have a lot to cover today. So before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. The material that we're going to present today here, it's for informational purposes only. Should not be considered legal advice. As we're all seeing, the trade policy landscape is constantly evolving. The insights shared here, they reflect our interpretation of the information available as of today. New guidance from the administration or CBP may emerge that could alter some of what we cover, including some of the new updates literally just this morning. So for those of us that haven't had the opportunity to meet, I am Kate Rayer. I am the Vice President of Regulatory Services here at Green Worldwide. I'm a licensed customs broker, over 21 years in the trade industry, 6 of those here at Green. I lead our Global Trade Solutions group, where we focus on highly specialized customs services, including foreign trade zones, duty drawback, strategic trade advisory services, and enterprise-level customs brokerage. I'm also proud to contribute to industry leadership through my involvement with the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones. There I sit on several committees, including the Trade and Tariff Rapid Response Team, and I also sit on the Trade Policy Committee here at the World Trade Center, Denver. So just to talk about a little why we're here, we continue to see a surge in client questions, including things like, I read about this in the news. What does it actually mean? How do I separate policy fact from political speculation? Today, my goal is to really help you understand that, clarify what's happening, what's potentially coming, and how these developments could affect your business and your supply chain operations. Like I said, we do have a full agenda today. We're going to walk through the current tariff environment, including the recent updates to all the reciprocal tariffs, talk about country-specific trade updates and negotiations, the court challenges going on with the IEEPA tariffs, and updates to Section 232 for copper, and also de minimis. I know this is a challenging time. Many of you, you're facing immense pressure from, your leadership to adapt and plan, deal with landed costs in a shifting environment. Again, that makes your presence here especially appreciated. One of the hardest questions companies face right now is, how do I determine which tariffs apply to my products? How do I accurately calculate new landed costs in a shifting environment? How do I equip myself and my leadership team with the right data to make fast and smart, quick decisions? These questions, they're not easy. That's exactly why we're here. So today I'm going to walk you through some practical tools, real world examples that explain how the tariffs are calculated, what that means for your customs entries, for your costing, for your supply chain strategy. And a final point before we dig in here, in today's environment, and I know I've said this before on previous webinars, but just to reiterate, precision matters more than ever. Accurate HTS classification, country of origin declarations, proper valuation, clean data, these are all absolutely critical. Not just for your compliance, but also for your agility. These elements, they form the foundation of compliant customs entries and tariff assessments, and getting them right is the key to navigating today and what lies ahead. So with that, we'll dig right in. So bear with 1 second here. All right, so turning our attention first to the updates on the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. These were just released last week on an executive order on July 31st. This order further modifies the tariff rates applied to certain trading partners under the authority of IEEPA. So here's the headline, is that countries listed in Annex 1 to this executive order will be subject to the reciprocal tariffs as listed. Countries not listed in Annex 1 of this order will instead face a 10% tariff on their goods. These measures will become effective tomorrow, August 7th, with an in-transit exemption being allowed. So to qualify for the in-transit exemption, goods have to be 1, loaded onto the vessel at the port of loading and in transit on the final mode of transport prior to entry into the United States before 12:01 Eastern Daylight Time on August 7th, and must be entered for consumption or withdrawn for warehouse from consumption on or after midnight on August 7th and before October 5th. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see a breakdown by country. This shows the adjusted tariff rates. There are a few things that are worth pointing out here. Some countries like, Algeria, South Africa, these are going to be hit with higher tariffs of 30%. Others, such as Japan, Germany, and Vietnam, are at the 15 to 19% range. The EU has more complex treatment. Goods with a column 1 general rate of duty greater than 15% will now no longer have any additional reciprocal tariffs. And if the column 1 rate is less than 15%, the tariff will be the general rate of duty plus the difference to get to the total of 15%. This is a shift in a more complex way from the more usual uniform, most favored nation approach. I will have some examples to show how this is calculating later on. Also important to note, this order does not alter or override the May 12th executive order for China imports. This is still a separate process along with Canada and Mexico, so they're not included in this group. Those are covered under the IEEPA fentanyl orders. This also does not change the exemptions in place that were announced under Annex 2. I've been getting that question a lot. Is the Annex 2 exemption still in place? And the answer to that is yes. Until alternate reciprocal agreements are formally concluded or there are further announcements and they are formalized, these are the rates that are going to be in place. These rates are ad valorem, so based on the value. And what does this mean for importers? If you are sourcing from any of the countries listed, these new tariffs will likely affect your landed cost calculations. They may affect your supplier relationships and your sourcing strategies. This slide, along with the rest of the presentation, will be shared after the session, so you can take a look and evaluate which countries may be impacted. But for now, going to move on to how this ties into broader tariff negotiations and where you may see impacts. Before I get into that, though, I do want to bring up something that's very important. This language has been included in recent announcements, which is the inclusion of an enforcement mechanism and additional tariff for goods that CBP has determined to be transshipped to evade applicable IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. This additional tariff would be a 40% in addition to any other applicable or appropriate fine, penalty, other duties, fees, and taxes. The guidance also indicates that this rate advance for this penalty would happen upon liquidation of the entry. So again, that could be almost a year after your customs entries in most cases. So what's unclear at this time about this carve out is how CBP defines or determines the transshipment of goods. The guidance for this has not been released, and there isn't a single universal U.S. government definition of transshipment for trade. According to the FMC, transshipment means the physical transfer of cargo from a vessel or of one carrier to a vessel of another. Okay, so according to trade preference statutes, for example, under AGOA, transshipment is defined as claiming preferential treatment based on materially false information about the article's country of origin, manufacture, processing, or assembly. If you look at USMCA, under the transshipment article, originating goods retain their originating status when they move directly from the exporting party to the importing party without passing through a non-party territory. However, origin can still be preserved when passing through a non-party territory if strict conditions are met. One, that the good remains under customs control while in the non-party territory, or two, it only undergoes limited operations necessary for transport and preservation. This could be unloading, reloading, separating from bulk shipment, etc. These sections use the word transshipment, but they do not provide a single, clear, global definition of how this will be determined or enforced, meaning what exactly is the administration and CBP considered to be transshipped. According to the administration, the point of the transshipment rules is to ensure that we have in our bilateral trade agreements that the two parties maintain the benefit and that there's not a third party that is getting an undue benefit without making the type of commitments we have. From this, if we speculate, we could see, a complex evolution of rules of origin. We could see an evolution including substantial transformation requirements, as well as, we could see regional content value, requirements to limit inputs from third countries. Still, only time is going to tell as more information is released. Any of these initiatives and these evolutions would be extremely complex. However, CBP does have, many tools in its toolbox to take this on. So it will be interesting to see its approach. And again, as we learn more, this is a pretty important issue to follow. And again, as a note, because country-specific tariffs and because increased enforcement on these potential transshipments, it's critical to declare your country of origin correctly. It's critical to not just take the origin from your supplier at face value. Do your due diligence, understand where the inputs are coming from, review and maintain bills of material where necessary, bounce those off of the existing rules of origin, make sure your components pass the substantial transformation test when it's required, and ensure it's right, because again, you are on the hook for misdeclarations. They could have considerable consequences. These could be in the form of penalties or tariffs, as we're seeing. And it's always better to be able to back up the origin declaration and show that you're exercising reasonable care. All right, so now I'm going to go over to looking at what's going on with the country-specific trade negotiations, which are shaping our trade environment. This chart, it summarizes key updates, executive actions, publications issues with details that can significantly impact landed costs and sourcing decisions. So walking through some of the highlights, some of these I did break out into their own sections a little bit later on, so this is more high level. So we covered the U.S.-UK economic prosperity deal on the last webinar. This one was formalized in May and implemented in June via an executive order. This deal expanded market access in ag. It also allowed for a tariff rate quota on autos, plus a blend of Section 232 steel and aluminum tariff reductions and exemptions for strategic commodities. Canada is covered under the IEEPA fentanyl orders. This is a recent change where the rates were 25%. They are now at 35%. There is still going to be reductions or exemptions for energy products, potash, and USMCA compliant goods. I will cover Canada a little bit more later on. For China, back in May, the U.S. and China released a joint statement from Geneva, which temporarily reduced tariffs. We are watching this one very closely because, the temporary stay was a 90-day stay, and that 90 days is up on August 12th. So we may see changes potentially either reinstating higher tariffs or extending the suspension. Of course, August 12th is right around the corner, so we are expecting to see some news on this one soon. Mexico is still tied to the IEEPA fentanyl orders. What's notable here is the recent announcement of the 90-day stay for the 25% tariff, so no tariff increase for Mexico. Important to note on this, though, we have only seen this published on social media. We have not seen anything formalized here. So again, this is what we know now, could be changed at a later time. For Indonesia, the U.S. reached a reciprocal tariff agreement with Indonesia in late July. This one is pending full formalization. For now, this one is covered under the broader reciprocal tariff agreement, so their tariffs are going to be at 19% for now. Japan, we saw another announcement. This one was under the U.S.-Japan Strategic Trade and Investment Agreement. According to the update, there will be a $550 billion investment and a 15% U.S. tariff cap. This is on the conditions that Japan opens up its markets to the U.S. But again, this one is still pending formalities, so it is covered by the broader agreement at this time. The EU, again, is one of the more complex frameworks that has been announced at this point. Again, still pending full formalization. This arrangement removes tariffs on U.S. goods worth over $75 billion, which will be phased in by 2028. There was an announcement from the EU that's a little bit more detailed than the one from the U.S. It included some highlights for strategic commodities that would see a reduction in tariffs. However, because this is still pending formalization, as of now, tariffs are as they stand today, and there aren't any other exemptions for the EU. So starting tomorrow for the EU, we do have this kind of different arrangement with, if the general rate of duty is lower than 15%, then the reciprocal tariff is the delta. If it's higher, there is no additional reciprocal tariff. Again, I do have slides to show this in a little bit. For Vietnam, South Korea, India, which, there was some news on India this morning, which I'll talk about as well, there is still no formal deals on these. So anything that there is not a formal deal, any country, these are all covered by the broader executive order. Their country-specific rates are listed in Annex 1 of that order. And again, we're waiting additional details as these do get formalized. So why does this matter? We've been seeing a lot of promises, letters, fact sheets, outlines of deals, social media posts. It's been really hard to track. We haven't seen many deals formalized, and indeed it hasn't been the 90 deals in 90 days. So, the announcement's terms are all subject to change due to further negotiations in progress. I know everyone has been looking for and hoping for clarity, with these announcements and the current status and back of the napkin deals and social media posts. It's prudent to expect fluctuations and changes as this all unfolds. There is still a lot of open questions and clarifications that are needed for the trade community. Okay, so fresh off the press, and of course, as soon as I wrapped up prep for today, we got another tariff announcement. Just this morning, an executive order was signed imposing a 25% additional tariff on imports from India, which is going to be effective on August 27th. So this one we have a little bit of a runway for. The reason for this tariff is that India continues to purchase oil from Russia and resells it for a profit, which is undermining the U.S. sanction efforts. From the executive order, the tariff applies in addition to existing tariffs, except for items that are already exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, which again, those are the ones that are on Annex 2 of that order. And these tariffs also do not apply to items subject to 232. It does stack with the existing reciprocal rate for India of 25%. So you take the existing rate of 25, add in this new 25, we now have a total of 50. There will be an in-transit exemption for merchandise loaded on the final mode of transport for entry before August 27th, so 21 days from now, and then they must be entered into U.S. commerce by September 17th. As of now, we do not know if these are going to be available for drawback or not. That information is generally published in the CSMS message, which we have not seen yet. We do know that along with all the other recent orders, subject merchandise will require privileged foreign status for foreign trade zone admissions. Note that we might see more tariffs follow for other countries that are in the same boat as India here. There are many countries that purchase Russian oil, including China. So again, I do expect we're going to see more updates over the coming days and weeks on this one. Okay, so more about China. The U.S. and China, again, they reached their temporary framework. That temporary framework is going to be up in 90 days, which again is August 12th. The current suspension is a temporary removal of the 34% increase, and we're currently at that 10% baseline plus the 20% for the fentanyl order. So again, we're really pending an update on this one over the next week or so. I expect we're either going to see the rates return to 34% instead of 10%, or we're going to see an extension of this stay. So more to come on this one. We will be watching this one closely as well. Okay, so getting into the EU framework a bit more, again, this one is more complex than the others. The White House announced a trade arrangement with the EU. It aims to update transatlantic economic ties, expand market access, and establish reciprocal tariffs and investments. So effective tomorrow, a 15% reciprocal tariff applies to some EU imports and is classification dependent for the amount. The 15% does replace the 10%. And the rates are being determined based on the commodity's general rate of duty or most favored nation rate. It's an ad valorem equivalent for those rates that are calculated based on something other than value, such as a per kilo calculation, a per liter calculation, et cetera. So For merchandise classified where the general rate of duty is less than 15%, the reciprocal tariff rate will be the difference between the MFN rate, so the general rate of duty, and 15%. So for an easy example, if the general rate of duty is 5%, the reciprocal tariff would be 10. If the general rate of duty is 2.5%, the reciprocal tariff would be 12.5%. This one, again, it's a new approach to tariff calculation. It does require programming updates to be able to properly administrate that. Of course, there's not a whole lot of runway for software companies, for customs to get this all set to go. So we're watching this one for further updates for how they're really going to manage this. No additional reciprocal tariffs will apply for merchandise classified where the general rate of duty is at least 15%. And I do have some examples to show you on the next slide. There is going to be an in-transit exemption for the EU and all of the other trading partners that are covered under that broader reciprocal tariff order. This does allow an exemption where the merchandise was loaded onto a vessel at the port of loading and in transit on the final mode before entry in the U.S. before August 6th, and products must be entered by October 5th. I've been getting a lot of questions about EU announcements and the U.S. announcements, and as of now, again, the EU has announced that there will be special treatment for strategic products such as aircraft parts, chemicals, certain drugs, natural resources. Both parties tentatively agreed to expand that list over time. However, nothing has been formalized on the U.S. side. So for now, the reciprocal tariffs apply to these commodities just like others unless they're exempted in the formal announcements. So for some examples of how these break out, I wanted to provide you with how the tariffs would calculate prior to August 7th and how they're going to calculate August 7th and later. The examples are for a men's shirt, one with a general rate of duty less than 15% and one with a general rate of duty greater than 15%. The first example is for a men's knitted shirt made of man-made fibers containing 23% or more by weight of wool or animal fur. The general rate of duty for this one is 13.6%. Okay, the existing reciprocal tariff rate of 10% would bring this total to 23.6% plus taxes, fees, etc. So if that shirt is valued at $5 each, the total tariff for each shirt would be $1.18 for a landed cost of $6.18. Again, this is before August 7th. For the same commodity from the EU on the right, okay, so this one is after August 7th, the same general rate of duty, 13.6%. However, now that reciprocal tariff is the delta between the general rate of duty and 15%. So the reciprocal tariff now becomes 1.4% for the total of 15%, which brings the total tariff for this commodity down for a landed cost of $5.75. So an overall reduction in this example. The second example, similar commodity. This one is just a men's knitted shirt, man-made fibers, other. For this one, and I'm on the bottom left here, the general rate of duty is 32% for this one, so much higher. The existing reciprocal tariff of 10% would have brought the total for this one before August 7th to 42%. If the shirt is the same value, $5 each, the total tariff for each shirt would be $2.10 for a total of $7.10 landed. For the same commodity after August 7th, so on the bottom right, the general rate of duty is still 32%. However, because that general rate of duty is over 15%, the reciprocal tariff drops to 0, which brings the total tariff for this commodity down to 32% total for a total of $6.60. Once again, a reduction. And then a few more examples just comparing how this looks if we look at the same commodities across different countries. Of course, keep in mind, these are just tariffs. They don't account for other costs in your supply chain, such as production, raw materials, labor, transportation, etc. Just looking to show you what the landed cost is here for product cost and tariffs. Same commodities in this example, the men's knitted shirt containing the wool. The general rate of duty for this one still 13.6%. The existing reciprocal tariff rate of 10% would bring the total to 23.6, as we just talked about. And if the shirt to $5, this will be $6.18 landed. For the same commodity from the EU, right? Sorry. Same, yes, same commodity from the EU. It's a general rate of duty, 13%. The total landed cost here, $5.75. If we compare it to Vietnam, the general rate of duty is still 13.6%. However, the reciprocal tariff amount for Vietnam is 20%. So for this one, the total is now $6.68 compared to South Africa. Their tariff rate is even higher at 30%. So the total duty percentage for this one, including the reciprocal tariff general rate of duties, is 43.6%, bringing that total landed cost to $7.18. And if we look at the second example on the bottom, you can see it's a similar line of thinking here where the EU comes out ahead in their arrangement where, even for the higher tariff products, they're ending up with a lower cost for tariffs. Okay, so I actually just saw a question about this in the chat, so this is actually good timing. Moving on to some resources here, I've been asked a lot for a quick tool to look up tariffs. We now have on GreenX, which is our online tracking platform, a tool where you can enter in an HTS code and a country of origin, receive a duty rate, and see the additional tariffs that could apply. So this is available again within our platform. It is a lookup tool that, of course, does a great job, but does not account for all possible nuances. It doesn't account for potential exemptions, some value splits, but it's a really great place as a point of reference, and it's a good place to start. If you are in GreenX, you can see on the top right there, you can use that drop down to get to that tariff lookup tool. Of course, always best to double check everything and make sure you're accounting for all of those possible nuances. Okay. Talking more about what's going on with some of the country-specific negotiations. So on July 30th, our president signed an executive order declaring a national emergency in response to actions by the Brazilian government that allegedly violated free expression of rights and harmed U.S. companies. So to address that threat, we're going to see a 40% ad valorem tariff added, assessed on products of Brazilian origin. So let me break that down and exactly what it means. The 40% tariff applies to goods that are entered for consumption on or after August 6th. This is on top of existing duties, including the 10% reciprocal tariff that was imposed earlier this year. In other words, most Brazilian goods now will face a 50% tariff, which is the 40% emergency tariff that was just announced, plus the 10% reciprocal. There are some exemptions. Several categories are excluded. Goods covered by Section 232 national security tariffs, which is currently steel, aluminum, autos, parts, newly announced copper, are not subject to this 40% tariff. There is also an exemption list for this one, which is included under Annex 1 of this order. So this includes things like silicon metal, pig iron, civil aircraft parts, tin ore, wood pulp, precious metals, energy products, fertilizers. These are all exempt. So please, if you do have Brazilian imports, check these lists, see if they apply to your imports. Again, donations to and informational materials are also excluded. With this one, there is going to be an in-transit exemption where the 40% duty does not apply. This is for articles loaded before August 6th and entered by October 5th. Aligning with all of the other orders, goods admitted to an FTZ on or after August 6th that are subject to these tariffs must be entered in privileged foreign status. An interesting note here, duty drawback is available on these tariffs, so importers may be able to recover some duties if they later re-export these goods or destroy these goods. This is different than the other emergency orders that were issued for Canada, Mexico, and China. So interesting note on that one. To summarize here for Brazil, there are two significant developments. The new 40% emergency tariff on most Brazilian imports. This pushes our duties to now about 50%. And there is also an open Section 301 investigation that targets Brazil's digital trade barriers, tariff policies, and environmental practices, which I will cover a little bit later. All right, more about Canada. Recently, on July 31st, we saw that these tariffs go from 25% to 35%. This was effective on August 1st. This is a 10 percentage point increase in response to the broader national emergency on the fentanyl crisis on the northern border. This 35% tariff applies to most Canada origin goods entered for consumption on or after August 1st. The prior 25% tariff continues on goods entered before that date, and there was no in-transit exemption for this one, which is unlike some of the other recent tariff measures that we've covered here. This one took effect almost immediately. There is still going to be that exemption for USMCA, which is huge and great to see. Energy imports such as crude oil, natural gas, refined petroleum, et cetera, potash, those continue to see that reduction of 10%. This order, interestingly, also does mention that transshipment tariff that we talked about earlier. Drawback is not going to be available for these tariffs, and there are still other exemptions for humanitarian donations, informational materials, etc. And finally, while Canada does face a higher rate, according to social media, again, tariffs on Mexico are unchanged for another 90 days. So to summarize, on July 31st, we saw these jump. Effective August 1st, we are now at a 35%. And we're holding steady for Mexico at this point. All right, I know some of you are tracking this issue very closely. We've been watching the legal proceedings going on with IEEPA. Recently, 2 federal courts struck down sweeping tariffs imposed by the administration under IEEPA. CIT panel ruled unanimously that these actions were unlawful. A nationwide permanent injunction was issued to bar the government from collecting these tariffs. Importantly, though, the CIT did not include that the president lacks general authority under IEEPA to impose these tariffs, but instead the decision focused on implementing these specific tariffs, noting that they served as leverage and didn't really address the issue directly. Recently, just as of last week, an 11-judge panel at the U.S. Court of Appeals they appeared skeptical of the administration's argument that it can use a congressional statute like IEEPA to impose expansive tariffs. These legal battles are still ongoing. I expect that we'll see these reach the Supreme Court. Even if if they are struck down, what will happen is still unknown. If they do block these tariffs, then we might see the agenda change. We might see them use alternative legal authorities such as Section 122, 338, 301, 232. There's a lot of different avenues here for them to use. However, this is still ongoing and we're continuing to watch this one. Okay, so on to Section 232. This one is going to be for copper. This one is recent. There is a new 50% tariff on semi-finished copper products and copper-intensive derivative products under Section 232, which authorizes the president to adjust imports that threaten national security. So following a recent investigation, the administration concluded that foreign producers of copper pose a threat to U.S. economic and national security. So the president has announced a new import tariff in response to that. So the tariff's purpose is to protect the U.S. copper supply chain by discouraging imports from countries whose trade practices are considered unfair or threatening to our national security. This is now an active measure and was in effect as of August 1st. This is a 50% tariff. It is only on certain products, on covered products. Non-copper content of these products remains subject to other tariffs, including fentanyl reciprocal tariffs. So if a copper product is already covered by Section 232 auto as well, this tariff does not apply. So again, this tariff is based on the copper content in the product, just like your steel and your aluminum derivative products. Okay. So this measure covers things such as pipes, wires, rods, sheets, tubes, as well as more copper-intensive derivative products like pipe fittings, cables, connectors, things like that. Refined copper is currently excluded, as are ores, concentrates, cathodes, and nodes, and scrap. Some additional notes, there is a note that the U.S. does plan to work with the U.K. to develop a coordinated approach for addressing the national security risks for the copper sector. So we will be seeing more information come out about this one. And also noted, within 90 days of this proclamation, a process will be added to include additional derivative articles. This is also aligning more with the steel and aluminum process, so we might see more additions to these products. And again, also aligning with steel and aluminum, CBP is going to mandate strict compliance with declaration requirements. So importers, if you do have products that are included, you need to make sure that you're reporting the copper content value correctly. You need to make sure that you are declaring the valuation and the additional tariffs on the non-copper content properly. If you do not know the copper content value in weights, the tariff will be assessed on the whole value. So very important information to get. See what else. Products covered by this proclamation are also being required to use privileged foreign status. This means, again, that the goods will be charged duties at the rate in effect when they are admitted to the zone and not when they leave the zone. And for these, drawback is not available. Okay, so there is some other action going on with Section 232 investigations. So these are commodities to watch. Again, Section 232 investigations are related to national security. Outside of copper, steel, and aluminum, these commodities here are still in the investigation phase, so no tariffs have been imposed just yet. These sectoral investigations have become, a favored tool of the administration. They do typically take a little bit of time, up to a year to complete. However, we are seeing, the gas on the accelerator a little bit more with these recently. So during this time, while they're in the investigation status, what the Department of Commerce is doing is they're gathering data, they're soliciting public comments, they're assessing supply chain risks, and if these investigations conclude that imports threaten national security, the president then can respond with tariffs or other restrictions. So the commodities currently under investigation include timber and lumber, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, pharma and pharma ingredients, trucks, which are medium and heavy duty in parts, critical minerals and derivative products, commercial aircraft and jet engines, polysilicon and its derivatives, and unmanned aircraft systems and parts. So recently, we have seen that, just as of yesterday, the administration noted that we may see movement on these within the next week or so, particularly in the pharma and semiconductor sectors. So I expect we're going to continue to see news come out, shakeups happen with these. So specifically, if you are impacted by the pharma or semiconductor sectors, pay close attention to this one. So in summary, these sectoral tariffs, they're likely going to expand beyond aluminum, steel, and copper. These are not automatic tariffs like we've seen, the IEEPA being used. Stakeholders in these industries definitely monitor these investigation timelines. Consider submitting comments if the comment period is open, and prepare for potential outcomes, including tariffs. So more about Section 301. 301 is the statute that empowers the USTR to investigate foreign acts, policies, or practices that are unreasonable or discriminatory and burden U.S. commerce. So unlike Section 232, these focus more on unfair trade practices, and investigations can lead to negotiations, tariff measures, other remedies. The table lists that there are 4 open Section 301 investigations, and just briefly go over each one of these. Brazil, like I mentioned earlier, this is a recently opened investigation that was just opened in July. So this is examining a broad range of Brazilian policies. So it's covering digital trade, electronic payment services. It's covering market access, preferential tariffs that disadvantage U.S. exports, anti-corruption, weak intellectual property protections, high tariffs, things like that. So the process is written comments and requests to appear at public hearings are due mid-August. There will be a hearing likely in early September, and the investigation is really still in information gathering phase. And again, this is separate from the IEEPA tariffs that were just announced for Brazil. So will be interesting to see how this investigation progresses and how that impacts the other emergency orders that are in place. For China, there is, excuse me, there is an open 301 investigation targeting the semiconductor industry. So this one dates back to late last year. So USTR announced an investigation into China's strategies to dominate the global semiconductor markets. So evidence suggests that China pursues ambitious market share targets and employs non-market tools to achieve self-sufficiency. The probe really focuses on foundational semiconductors to the extent China practices downstream industries such as defense, automotive, medical devices, power systems, things like that. So this one, there is not, as of now, a published determination. Any eventual action could include, of course, tariffs and negotiated commitments from China. And then also for China, there's the one that we've talked about a few times. This one is targeting the maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors. This one is still kind of in flux as well. However, fees do start on this one in October. And lastly, there is one for Nicaragua as well. This one is examining labor rights, human rights, and the rule of law. So USTR announced this investigation late last year. It is the first Section 301 to really focus on labor and human rights abuses rather than on economic policy. So it was explained in numerous reports that it's looking at politically motivated arrests, repression of civil society, forced labor, human trafficking, things like that. So this one, again, there is no determination, but we will see, kind of where this lands and whether it will be additional trade measures, sanctions, tariffs, or negotiations, or how that will end up shaking out. But these are all still open at this time. So getting into de minimis updates, this is another piece of big news that is recent. So as of last week, on July 30th, the administration signed an executive order that is going to be suspending the duty-free de minimis shipment for for low-value imports. The White House has explained, that this policy is designed to stop tariff evasion, curb the flow of dangerous goods, particularly fentanyl, through parcel shipments. This order takes effect later this month on August 29th. So on August 29th, low-value imports that were previously entered in duty-free under that $800 de minimis threshold will no longer be eligible for duty-free treatment. CBP will suspend this exemption, which means that all non-postal shipments, regardless of value or origin, these will all be subject to duties, taxes, fees, and other charges. This suspension now applies globally and is separate from the earlier suspensions that targeted specific countries. So what is the impact of this? The impact is that there will be entry required. So businesses importing goods previously qualified for de minimis treatment must now file entry. They must use the appropriate entry type. This means that paperwork will increase. We will see us, shy away from quicker courier clearances. Informal entries that are valued below $2,500 will also require basic importation and entry bond. Carriers must have an international carrier bond, and every non-postal package, even those just worth, a few dollars, will be assessed tariffs. The shift to entry requirements will probably result in delays, higher administrative costs, low value shipments that once flowed through, express carriers with minimal documentation must now clear customs like larger consignments do. So this will result in higher duty liabilities, higher compliance costs. This might encourage, companies to consolidate shipments or move fulfillment closer to U.S. customers. Some e-commerce sellers might shift inventory to U.S. distribution centers as a result. So this is a big change. We tried this before when we started to end de minimis, and it was quickly reversed. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But again, this has been announced. This is going to take effect on August 29th. Now, to talk about postal shipments, so this is related to international postal shipments. There is a difference here. So the difference is in the way that the tariffs will be calculated. So for the first 6 months, postal carriers may choose one of two duty collection methods on de minimis packages. And interestingly, they can't change it more than once per month. So the first methodology is it going to be a duty or tariff equal to the IEEPA tariff rate applicable to the package's country of origin applied to the declared value of each package. So for an example, let's take Brazil, because we just talked about Brazil. If Brazil faces a 50% tariff, a 400% shipment from Brazil would owe $200 in tariffs, okay, for without de minimis. The second methodology is more of a specific duty per item or a flat fee per item based on the exporting country's IEEPA rate. So countries with an IEEPA rate below 16% would be $80 an item. Okay. Rates below between 16 and 25% would be $160 per item. Rates above 25% would be $200 per item. So carriers apply a fee to each dutiable postal package. So this second option is only going to be transitional. So after 6 months, only option 1, which is the ad valorem method, will be available, and each package must clearly declare its country of origin. So in summary, when this de minimis exemption ends on August 29th, postal shipments will face duties at either the prevailing IEEPA rate or a specific per item rate, depending on the carrier's chosen method. The specific duty option, again, is only transitional, it's temporary, and will need to transition to the ad valorem calculation after 6 months, unless something changes. So what does this mean? Businesses that rely on postal imports, you got to start preparing for these changes. You need to evaluate the supply chain, see what de minimis you have, make necessary updates, really make sure you've got this origin nailed down, and coordinate with your carriers on, the selected duty methodology so you can understand how the cost will be calculated. Okay. All right. Back to looking at different resources. The tool I showed you earlier, the lookup tool within our GreenX platform, that's more of a simple lookup tool that shows you, what the tariffs are today. It may show you, if I'm looking up what the rate for that men's t-shirt is going to be and I put it in there, it's going to tell me what that rate is today. Okay. Alternatively, tariff modeling, what it does is it allows you to navigate this volatile trade environment that we've been discussing. Companies here, we need more than spreadsheets. You need analytical tools that simulate different scenarios, allows you to translate large data sets into actionable insights. Simulating what if situations. So like just this morning, right? If you're like, oh, well, I do have a supply chain and India is impacted. I do import from India. Now I can quickly adjust, put in that 25% and see how that's going to impact my overall supply chain cost. Okay. So you could simulate the cost of a 10% tariff on semiconductors, 25% on India, whatever it is. And then you can model what happens if these tariffs go into place. You can make adjustments on the fly in real time, and this allows your procurement teams to requote suppliers, finance to recalibrate your landed cost models, and logistics to make decisions on different strategies to potentially mitigate tariffs where possible. So this tool, I'm going to be providing you with information about this after the webinar. There will be a link in there with more information if this is something that you are interested in looking at. Okay, I'm going to wrap up talking a little bit more about duty drawback. We've talked about it briefly in previous webinars. However, in light that we do have more of these tariffs that are going to be allowable for drawback, including the new Brazil one, I do want to spend some more time on this. So duty drawback is the program that allows claimants to file for refunds of duties, tariffs, taxes, where eligible, that are paid to CBP when the merchandise is going to be exported or destroyed. So currently, both the Section 301 tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, the new Brazil 40% tariffs, these are all allowable for drawback. The IEEPA fentanyl tariff, Section 232, along with anti-dumping, countervailing duties, these are not eligible for duty drawback. Okay. You can still file drawback on entries where only certain tariffs are eligible. However, you could only get the drawback on those lines of the entry where the drawback is allowable. Those would only be the claimable lines. So, with the news and all of these shifts of what's eligible, what's not eligible, companies maybe previously didn't have, enough to make it worth the time. They now are reevaluating that, reconsidering their options, and looking at if this program is right for them. So any company can explore drawback as an option to mitigate certain tariffs. However, the exporter from the U.S. is the first party eligible. So if you are both the importer and the exporter from the U.S., the process is much simpler. You're going to have data, hopefully have all your documents. If you are just the exporter, you would need to have cooperation from the initial importer to explore drawback, as you would need the importer import records and documentation. And if you are the importer only but not the exporter, it's the same thing except in reverse. You would need cooperation from the exporter, and they would need to provide you with export records. So drawback can be incredibly beneficial to a lot of companies. It does, it is an investment in both time and labor. However, if you have imports and you have exports or destructions and you have records and you have data to provide for claims, it is definitely worth investigating to see what the potential refunds could be for your company. So it's important to note, though, and I don't want to lose sight of this, is that I know the tariffs are affecting us today here in 2025 more than ever. However, with the look back, you can go back up to 5 years, right? So if you have been paying Section 301 tariffs for the last 5 years, you have generally high rates of duty, you have exports, and you have destructions, you may be able to get some of that cash flow back. So right now, we're still able to claim drawback for entries filed back in 2020, in the later half of 2020. Okay, so just don't discount the stuff from the past. I know right now is definitely the more impactful time, but it's worth looking at that whole 5-year period and getting set up for drawback if you do have money on the table. And I do want to talk about the different types of duty drawback, just to further explain this. So the drawback laws, they really organize drawback claims into 3 main buckets, which I'll explain. So the first bucket is going to be manufacturing, the second bucket is going to be unused merchandise, and the third bucket is going to be rejected merchandise. So under direct identification and substitution manufacturing drawback, what this covers is it applies when you have imported components that are used to produce a new article in the United States, and then that finished article is exported or destroyed. If that happens, you can get and file for a refund on the imported component duty paid. Now, there's 2 different breakouts under this, one for direct ID and one for substitution. So direct ID, what that means is goods are manufactured with imported merchandise and are exported without being used domestically. The importer in that scenario may receive a refund of the duties paid on the imported inputs, and generally imports are matched to exports at a part number level. Substitution under 1313B, what this one does is it extends that refund to situations where maybe the imported materials are substituted with like domestic or foreign materials, generally classified under the same 8-digit HTS code in the manufacturing process. So even if none of the original imported goods are present in the exported article, drawback is still allowed as long as the exported item is produced within 5 years of importation and hasn't been used domestically. Here's an example. The infographic on the right shows a roll of fabric. The roll of fabric is imported into the United States and is manufactured into that t-shirt, okay? The same t-shirts we've been talking about. When those t-shirts are then exported, the importer can then claim drawback on the duty paid for the fabric. And under the substitution provisions, the exporter could also use the refund for shirts that are for domestic fabric or different imported fabric, as long as that fabric is classifiable under that same HTS heading and is provided the shirts are, again, exported or destroyed. So that's really how manufacturing drawback works. So if you're producing something in the United States, you may be eligible to claim a refund on the components that you are importing, okay? Now, talking more about unused merchandise. So unused merchandise drawback applies when imported goods are exported or destroyed in essentially the same condition within 5 years of importation and have not been used in the United States. That's a big one. So Section 1313J1, direct ID, allows the refund of duties if imported goods are exported or destroyed without being used, again, generally matched at that part number level. Section 1313J2 allows substitution unused. So for example, if a company exports other merchandise classified in the same HTS code that also hasn't been used, it can be designated back to that duty paid merchandise for a refund. So what does unused mean? Permitted operations would include things like testing, cleaning, repacking, sorting. Those do not count as use and therefore would not disqualify a claim. However, if the merchandise has been used for its intended purpose in the U.S., it is no longer eligible for drawback. So here's another example of this. The t-shirt is imported into the U.S. and then later exported. And because that shirt was not used domestically, the importer can recover those duties. You can get up to 99%. Even if you say imported a different color t-shirt and you exported a different color t-shirt, the importer can still claim drawback because of the substitution rules. There are going to be some limitations to consider in your supply chain under this provision, and it's not usable for exports to all countries such as Canada and Mexico, and it is also not usable for all import HTS codes. So this provision, the substitution provision, was a big change, and it is going to allow you to do a lot more liberal matching of your imports and exports. So again, if you do have imports and exports, it's worth looking into to see if you can start to get some of not only these tariffs back, but going back 5 years to get some of those back as well. Rejected merchandise is the last one I'll cover. This is for things that say import and then fail to meet specifications. Maybe they're defective, maybe they're shipped without the buyer's consent. 1313C drawback rules provide that the duties may be refunded when these goods have been entered for consumption or are exported or destroyed because they do not conform to sampler specifications and are returned. The importer in this situation does have to substantiate this claim. So generally this is in the form of correspondence with your supplier and working through all those issues with the supplier to prove to customs that it did fail to meet the specification upon importation. So the infographic again on the bottom right, this one does not meet the specifications. Here we are either going to export that t-shirt that did not meet those standards, or you're going to destroy that under customs custody. So again, drawback can be a way to mitigate some of these tariffs. So if you do want more information about that, we will be including our essentials guide in the follow-up along with the presentation. So last thing I'm going to talk about are just things to be watching as more of a recap. So again, we do expect to see that we're going to see further trade agreements, further updates to some of these deals and more formalization. They may change what's currently in place today. We may see changes if the investments promised to the administration do not materialize, if circumstances change. All of these deals and negotiations are delicate at this time, okay? We're also watching the IEEPA proceedings, so recommend you do so as well. See how these cases play out, how they may impact tariffs going forward. And as a trade community, we're watching for more guidance on CBPs on transshipment. What exactly does that mean, and what are they going to be enforcing here? And then on Section 232, like I mentioned, we do expect that we're going to see some movement on some of these open investigations now, in addition to potentially seeing additions to the existing orders that are in place for copper, steel, and aluminum. Okay, so that's it. I'm right under the hour here. I know I didn't get too many questions in the chat. I'll take a look through them and answer them as I can after the event. We covered a lot today. As always, we'll continue to see shifts and developments. So look for more invites for future webinars. We will be sending out the presentation slides along with the recording, additional resources for drawback and tariff modeling. And once again, really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. Have a good one.